Key Card presents Back Issue Bloodbath with your hosts, Andrew Young and Petula Neal.
If you're going to back out on a deal, don't back out on a deal with Jimmy Palmiotti, because he will guilt you into getting it done. Welcome to Back Issue Bloodbath. I'm Andrew Young.
I'm Petula Neal.
And this week we are continuing our House of the Devil sub-series, all about Daredevil. I know we had to take last week off for the Toronto Comic-Con recap, but we are back, and we're talking all things Matt Murdock and looking back at some of the biggest stories. And this story that we're looking at this week is from the late 90s, and it's one that actually brought me back into comics after a break from reading for a while. And that is Guardian Devil, the first 8 issues of the Marvel Knights Daredevil series. Written by Kevin Smith with artwork by Joe Quesada, inks by Jimmy Palmiotti, colors by Dan Kemp, Laura Depew, and Drew, and Richard Eisenhoff. And yeah, it was the launch of Marvel Knights. Now, were you reading at the time when Marvel Knights launched, Petula?
No, but I do remember hearing about Kevin Smith having worked on this, but I was not an issue-to-issue person at this time at all.
Right.
Yeah,
because that's the thing. A lot of this particular book got a lot of eyes on it because of the fact that Kevin Smith, a filmmaker, was going to be writing a comic book. And at that time, people in Hollywood, people in the movie business were not jumping at the chance to write comic books. Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti had known Kevin Smith for a couple of years at that point. They were approached by Smith to do artwork in the opening credits of Mallrats back in 95. They met at San Diego Comic-Con. That deal was made, so there's a cover of Jay and Silent Bob and Palmiotti and Quesada's character Ash together in one of the credit scenes at the beginning of Mallrats. And Jimmy and Joe would end up popping up in Chasing Amy. They don't have any lines, but at the big climactic scene where Banky and Holden make up non-verbally across a convention floor with hand gestures, the people that Affleck is standing behind is Jimmy Palmiotti and Joe Quesada's table. So they were there. So they were part of Smith's fake comic convention for Chasing Amy. And every time they hung out, they always talked about 2 comics. They always talked about Batman. They always talked about Daredevil, specifically Frank Miller's Daredevil run. Smith loved Frank Miller's Daredevil run. So did Joe and Jimmy. And so when Joe and Jimmy convinced Marvel to give them their 4 lowest selling titles to run as their own little in-house imprint at Marvel, they said, hey, let's get Kevin Smith to write Daredevil. And so they pitched it to him and said, you want to write Daredevil? And Smith's like, yeah, of course I want to write it. Fuck yeah, that's great. And so then months go by and Smith gets really deep into the editing of Dogma and is really focused on that. And he misses a deadline, hand in a script, and he misses another deadline. And so Joe calls him up and is like, hey, man, Christopher Priest has already handed in his Black Panther scripts. We really need you to get the scripts because like, I'm a slow artist. I need these scripts now so we can stay on schedule. And Kevin was like, I don't really think I have it in me to write this. He was originally supposed to write a story about Matt Murdock getting his sight back. And he's like, I don't really think I have to write this. I'm not Frank Miller. I'm not going to do a great job. People are going to hate it. And Joe went, no, that's fine. Well, Joe and Jimmy were both at Joe's apartment at this time. Joe gets off the phone. Jimmy calls Smith back and lets him have it with like, who the fuck are you? You said you were going to do this for us and you're fucking backing out. Like, who does that? You know, you say you're not Frank Miller. Nobody's fucking Frank Miller. And basically guilted him into doing it. And so Smith was like, oh, geez, what do I do? So that night he was watching a film called God Told Me To, a film by Roger Corman about a killer who believes they're talking to God. And he comes up with the idea of, hey, what if Daredevil's given a baby that might be the Messiah or might be the Antichrist and he's got to protect it? And that was the whole setup. And that's where it went from there. All that build up of that story for it to finally get out. It's funny to see Smith's insecurities almost stopped him from writing all of this.
Yeah, I listened to some interviews where he told that story as well. And then I'm like, but also you just worked on Dogma. So like the story ending up being about this whole like is the baby the Messiah, or is this just like a con job?
Yeah, it seems very
Like
on theme, on brand. Yeah.
faith and belief.
Yeah.
Definitely, Kevin was definitely in his exploring his faith bag at
Yeah.
that point in time. And how we got from there to where poor Karen ends up at the end of this run, well, we'll talk about that. I do love that hearing him talk about it, the success of this run, like the
Mhm.
sales were great. It ended up probably leading to a lot of other, as famous as he was then, more famous now people being willing to go back and forth between, working on comics and working in other media. All of that to say, like when they talk about the collaboration part, and I'm sure when you and I get into talking about book, we'll talk about some of the wordier sections. A, to think it could have been wordier, that just blows my mind. But B, it did end up being good, much better than Kevin Smith's work on some other titles. But I think it's because he was collaborating with people who were able to tell him at arguably the height of his powers, hey, buddy, get it together. Whether it's like do the job you promised to do or you're not rewriting the effing Bible over here.
Yeah,
So
totally.
that's where so many times we've talked about these big properties or IP or even certain creators that were great, but then they come back and maybe editing and other people are too precious with them. Regardless of where somebody is, you need to have the ability to collaborate. Like very few people can create the perfect thing in a vacuum, or if they do, most people only have that in them maybe once. So the ability to work with other people and hear their feedback, that is probably what made Kevin Smith so good on this book, that he was working with other people, that he was willing to listen to them, and those people were able to tell him, like without having to dance around it, what are you doing over here?
Well, it's interesting you talk about the feedback part. And it's also interesting you mentioned earlier that you weren't reading issue to issue at that time. Because this book, after the first three issues, it came out on such a sporadic pace. Instead of it being month to month, sometimes it was every 2 months, sometimes it was every 3 months. I think the last issue of the run, issue 8, it was 4 months between issues 7 and 8. So there was big gaps. Now, part of the reason is because Smith was taking his time bringing the scripts. Joe was a slow artist. Joe's father passed away during this as well. But on top of that, I think when they started out and started putting it together, they were putting it together the way they would if they were at Event Comics, which was what Joe and Jimmy's comic label was. Indie comics, you work on just putting out the issue. It's all about just getting out the issue. Something like Marvel and DC, to keep the schedule, it's all about getting out the next 6 issues nonstop. But they approached it very much more like the way they would approach it if it was an indie book. And so, because of that, they were getting books out there and they were getting feedback before the next scripts and everything were done. And because of that, that was really melding and molding the way the story was coming together, because they were not only looking at what they had done and what's been out there, but they were hearing from readers saying, well, wait a second, what does this mean? Or like, well, that's kind of crazy that you did that. And they went, yeah, you know what? Maybe we should dial it back there. Thankfully, they didn't overcorrect. Like, for this person over here said this and that and that. So we got to make sure it has this, this, and that. But they were taking the constructive criticism and helping mold the story. And that's part of the reason why the story actually changed after issue 3. In the October 1998 edition of Wizard Magazine, just as Daredevil #1 was about to come out, they had a sit-down interview with Smith, Palmiotti, and Quesada, and they talked about the launch of Marvel Knights and specifically Daredevil. And in it, Kevin revealed that he was going with something very classic in the sense that Matt Murdock, sometimes he has the weight of the world on him, sometimes he's not doing the best, but he finds a way to fight out of it. And then he went on to say, and the story is not your run-of-the-mill taken on the mob story. It definitely introduces a character that can be utilized in the Marvel Universe for years to come and almost puts a ticking clock on the Marvel Universe. It's got a lot of theological implications. Originally, the story was, of course, as we mentioned at the beginning, Daredevil is given a baby. And the young girl that gives it to him, she's a teenager who says that she's a virgin, who this baby was just gifted to her from on high, and that she had been visited by an angel telling her that it is to be the next Messiah. Yeah.
Also, that angel was a pretty chatty Cathy. downloading a lot of private information about Matt.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. Well, yes. Well, anyways, yes, yes. Downloading, eh? Again, at this point, it's still an angel. So really, it's just
Hmm.
knowing. At the same time, a distinguished looking gentleman shows up who says that he represents people, that their goal is to make sure that the Antichrist does not make it to adulthood to save humanity, sort of thing. And that that child is going to grow up to be the Antichrist. And so the idea of playing with the moral dilemma, and Daredevil doesn't know who to trust and who to tell with this and how it affects other people. Like Karen finds out this information and immediately, because of what's happening to her, thinks, hey, maybe we should give up the baby and all this sort of stuff. But a lot of people are like, how is this going to end? That was the main question, is like, how is this going to, is God going to show up? And that really made Smith and them go, yeah, we've kind of painted ourselves into a corner with this. So we need to find a way out. And so because of Kevin Smith's love of Kraven's Last Hunt and an issue of Swamp Thing, in which Swamp Thing goes to Gotham and there's someone trying to kill the Swamp Thing, and they go and they spend $1 million for a 5-minute meeting with Lex Luthor, because there's the amazing criminal mind who can tell them exactly how to kill the Swamp Thing. So taking that idea of a very powerful man who knows an enemy's weakness, like someone like the Kingpin with Daredevil, and mixing it with the idea of someone wanting to have one last hurrah to show that they're better than somebody, like Kraven did with Spider-Man. He crafted the story that the entire events, all the things that were happening to Matt Murdock, Foggy getting set up for murder, Karen Page being told she has AIDS, all these things were set up by Mysterio, who was doing this elaborate effects of making it look like celestial hosts and angels and all that sort of stuff to mess with Daredevil and to prove that he's better than him. And it's very cool. I remember when reading it issued, because again, waiting the time for the months the issues to come out, devouring the issues and go, wow, that's amazing. But at the same time, it's sort of like, huh. So you had an idea at the beginning, but you never really had an idea. You had the beginning of an idea.
You had concepts of a plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you put it into action and then went, oh shit, we got to come up with an ending of this. And oddly enough, I think that's the reason why it's Kevin Smith's best comic story. Because every other comic story he's ever put together has had a beginning and an end. Well, the exception of Daredevil the Target, I don't think will ever be finished. And the Spider-Man Black Cat story, that one did change midstream. But almost everything else, the Green Arrow stuff, the Batman stuff, he's had entire beginning, the middle, end plans fully planned out. So no changes made along the way. This was very much like rolling with the punches.
And again, that's where the collaboration, as you said, responding to feedback, also other constraints within the Marvel world, what's going on with certain characters. That's what made this, again, the exception that proves the rule of you need to be able to collaborate. And sometimes working within those Marvel chains can really forge something better than what it would have been with the first idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it evolved as it was already out in the world.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And so let's get into this story, because the one thing that I find really cool about it is because this was also a story that, like, Smith getting to play in the Daredevil universe and wanting to play with it in, playing with Frank Miller's stories and stuff like that, but playing with certain characters. So you get a very cool appearance in issue 2 by Black Widow. You get an appearance by Doctor Strange. You get an appearance by Mephisto. Spider-Man shows up in this. It is Smith getting his chance to play with the street level New York of the Marvel Universe. And for me, that's really what, like, when I read it, it's like, that's what I love the most about it, is that it isn't like just this big story of like, oh my God, is this the Messiah? It is hey, let's have Daredevil interacting with all the people he's interacted with over the years. Like basically like a greatest hits of interactions throughout the story. And of course, when you add to Quesada's artwork, especially the way he draws Black Widow, whew, it's some good times.
Black Widow looks great, but I'll say the real winner here from my kind of fit check analysis, like Stephen Strange's cape has never looked better. Like Strange's whole vibe in this, but especially his cloak. Good gravy, he looked amazing. Also, I'm gonna give runner up to Mysterio because it's very much like that hard, like it's just floating around his shoulders, like almost like a Lego kind of cloak. Like I have a little Lego Magneto, and his cloak fits in a similar way to Mysterio's did, where it's just sort of floating over the shoulders, like it feels
Yeah.
very snapped on.
Well, there was that
But
splash page that reveals Mysterio at the end of issue 5, I believe it is. Issue 5 or 6. Issue 6, yeah. At the end of issue 6, that what I really notice every time is the two fastening spots of where the cape is, with those two like almost like eye buttons type thing on his chest. That I'm like that to me really caught my eye. I'm like, oh, that actually looks pretty cool.
yeah, the whole fit and all of like the swirly, smoky demon, not demon rising nonsense during that section. Beautiful. Love that. Some of my favorite stuff from like a fit check perspective. And even, I guess that's one of the things when you're reading it, you are aware this doesn't feel like a normal comic. And part of it is just the Kevin Smith of it all. It's the wordiness after reading it and then doing some of the research and hearing about the history of how it was made, some of the wordiness. I wonder if even in some cases maybe that helped either save or delay. In some cases, they just let pages be filled with words. And we're
Mm.
just getting like little snippets of an image. Like we're getting like when Karen comes back and we see her curled up in bed and we're just getting like so much exposition there. Side note, this is like clearly a book written by like a bunch of dudes that don't really have any gay friends. Like by the time this book came out, you already had the antiretroviral cocktail of drugs. Like there was at least some nuance or understanding the difference between having like HIV or full-blown AIDS. Like Karen just rolling up and
I don't know. In the
Matt
late
just
'90s, there was still a great fear, just the ideal thought of it. The AIDS was still something that people were
yes. But
very much
as a
afraid of.
former sex worker who's getting tested that often, which Karen already was, you would have some basics of knowledge about that kind of stuff.
Mm.
Even if you didn't have friends maybe in the community that was hit most by it. But definitely like the antiretrovirals had been out for a while by then. So like her rolling up like that and like somebody as smart as Matt not being like, okay, let's go to a doctor first or even just get you retested or whatever. I know Karen's always a mess though when she rolls up. Like she never rolls up with a plan. She's always rolling up on Matt in a shambles.
Yeah.
But that was like the one part. It's like we could have checked this out to like just make sure. It's like, is this really a thing happening? Especially like finding out that she's been getting tested often for years. It's like all of a sudden this is just popping up with like no hints. Like you know, you weren't feeling a little woozy, like no T cell issues, like nothing. Else all of a sudden, boom, from like nothing when you're getting tested for years. Like later on, it does feel like somebody maybe even mentioned that to them because there is a bit of like her kind of talking through like or him kind of like, is this really something that happened? Or, oh my God, like, what do I expose Matt even? Because odds are she would have contracted it in her days of when she was taking drugs and sex work. But also, somebody like Matt, the amount of time that he spent between the sheets, I'm sorry, that man must be wrapping it up every time. Otherwise, he'd have more kids than Nick Cannon.
Oh yeah, no, no.
So,
I believe that Daredevil does make sure that he has the glove when he does the love. Mainly
yeah,
because probably with him, a condom wouldn't even desensitize.
exactly.
Because
He's all about the
he'd feel it through the condom, no problem. Yeah.
he's feeling things, he's hearing things, he's like smelling things. He's fine from
Oh,
a sensation perspective.
all of his sensual pleasure
Yeah.
centers are
Yeah,
activated.
he's the
Yeah.
one guy that can't be like, especially with the women who know he's Daredevil, can't be like, oh, it's like wearing a rubber jacket, whatever. I can't feel anything. It's like, really? Really? The man who
Well,
could like clock what perfume I'm wearing from across the room?
well, that's the
You're
thing
gonna
right
say it's
there.
cutting down on your sensations?
Again,
Like, use your other senses.
again, you're arguing with no one there. In fact,
Yes.
you're arguing Matt isn't even there.
Yeah, no,
We've
no.
already established Matt probably
Yeah, he's
did use
probably wrapping
condoms.
it
Yeah,
up every
there you go.
time
There
because
you go.
he's banging it out left and right.
Yeah, yeah.
So like when she's catastrophizing, like that's where it's like, but Karen is great at destabilizing Matt, and that's why she was perfect as like another device when they saw that he was sort of starting to act more rational. It's like that was the perfect point to introduce Karen at
Right.
because she is always such a shambles and he is at his most vulnerable with her and vulnerable to her shenanigans.
Yeah, and like that's the thing. The thing that's interesting about this is that in the books before the Marvel Knights relaunch, Daredevil had kind of gone back to almost like the 60s style stories of Daredevil, where he would become more of a swashbuckling superhero and really had fallen down the charts because of that. because you had it really becomes it's like Frank Miller had such a big run. In fact, he had two big runs. Then Ann Nesenti had a huge long run where Ann Nesenti did stuff with the character that I think only Ann Nesenti could have. She went off these weird like psychological paths, but also like slightly supernatural paths, and like sometimes I feel like when you're reading it, you were like on drugs. Like it was like there was so many different things happening that I feel like her stuff was so unique that when she left the book, others tried to take that, but then also work in the gritty edge of the mid 90s comic boom. And suddenly, Daredevil's wearing like a metal suit and looks kind of like a biker and all this sort of stuff, weird stuff. And so to get away from all of that, they had taken him back to factory settings and made him this swashbuckling superhero with some happy stories, some fun stories, some sad stories, but still very much like being the Spider-Man type clone that he was back in the 60s. And so Smith and Quesada brought him back into the world that Frank Miller had set up. And so because of that, you had to bring in the darkness. And the way the Karen stuff was handled is that Karen had come back into his life again, and now she was a radio disc jockey. And they had it that she had taken a job on the West Coast and had disappeared. And so the story begins with her leaving a letter for Matt basically saying, hey, this is why I'm leaving you this time. I know third time's the charm. Let's see, it's like the amount of times she has left him. This was the one where other times it was Matt's fault. This time it just felt very much like a, okay, I'm gone sort of thing. Her coming right back into his life with this, you need to be my savior again, Matt thing adds on the pressure. But then also on top of that, and I thought that was done really well. The part that I thought rereading now and knowing as much about Daredevil I know now, the part that doesn't ring true as much is the Foggy philandering. Foggy Nelson just suddenly being whisked away by some other woman when he's already with Liz Osborne. That seemed very much like we need to do something to Foggy to get him in trouble. Oh, he'll have an affair and it turns out it's a demon and she kills herself. And it's like, oh, okay, but that just doesn't feel like Foggy.
Yeah, under things that I assume are in the hundreds of pages of dialogue from Kevin that they had to cut. I'm assuming there was also at some point when we're getting like the Scooby-Doo reveal that there was also some drugging of Foggy as well to maybe amp up the sex drive or something. And they just had to cut that for time and space and page space. Because 100% I agree with you. Like Foggy's not for the streets like that.
Yeah. No, that felt that didn't feel like Foggy to me. But other than that, I feel like everybody else's characters, the essence of them are there.
Yeah. Although the person that he was with, they would have been highly incentivized to have him get it in. So there is a question of how much resistance would a Foggy put up if somebody who was very attractive was like really all over him and getting him full of booze.
True, I get that, but even
Yeah.
in the points when he's in the office with Matt and Matt's
Yeah.
asking him, he's like, "Oh, I've never met a woman like her." It just didn't seem like Foggy to me. That's what I'm saying. It said it didn't fully seem like Foggy. It felt very much like that was the one plot point where it was like plot trumped character, and went, "We need this to happen, so it's just going to happen," sort of thing. And we've seen that in comics before. But yeah,
I could see if like Foggy all of a sudden had a woman coming on to him the way women are always coming on to Matt. I could see him definitely being very flattered by it and entertaining it and letting it go too far. And then once he's drunk and maybe affected by some Mysterio drugs.
yeah, but by this point, Foggy had already stolen some girls from Matt being a bad boyfriend. So I don't know. I just don't feel that Foggy was, and also Foggy's with Liz Allen at this point, Liz Osborne, and that's like if you go back.
Oh, Liz was a dime for sure. I'm
Yeah.
just saying, men have cheated on Halle Berry. I'm just saying,
No,
like,
I get it.
I get it. I get what you're saying. I'm going to say people do things.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Now, of course, the big thing in this when they reworked the event and made it that it was no longer clandestine forces and the possible Antichrist or anything like that, and they brought in this whole Mysterio angle. From issue 4 on, they're dropping like little hints, small hints, like you have the astute, well-dressed man mentioning the arachnid and things like that. You have a newspaper that shows that same man has recently passed away. So what is he doing running some organization that's trying to track down the Antichrist? All these little things are there. And then of course, this leads to the assassination plot, which was brought in. They decided, hey, let's bring in Bullseye to have this moment. Now, the Bullseye coming in happens in the same issue as Sister Maggie coming back, which also Sister Maggie hadn't really been used since Born Again. Like, it was sort of like, here's the character. It wasn't like she suddenly became a part of Matt's life. She was a part of Matt's past and was like still, as you know, we talked about Born Again. She never says, yes, I am your mom and that sort of thing. So she's playing it coy. He wanted to bring that back because, of course, Born Again and Miller and all that sort of stuff. So this whole leads to Bullseye showing up at the church and just laying nuns and priests to waste. But this leads up to the big moment that people talk, the moment of contention. There are people that say that Karen's death is a fridging in this. I have to disagree because a lot of people forget that the original definition of fridging is taking a character that has just been introduced to be offed, not having any agency in their demise, and then they're gone just to get a reaction from the main character. I don't fully agree with that with this, though, because in this, Karen's very active in it, and Karen isn't just needlessly killed. The target is Daredevil. Karen sacrifices her life for someone she loves. Anybody in that situation would do the same thing. We did the Gwen Stacy death. Gwen Stacy doesn't talk. She gets thrown off a building. Her neck snaps. I totally agree that, yes, that is a fridging. I totally agree with that. This, Karen has, first of all, she tries to save the baby by giving the fake baby, doing the old Willow pig disappearing trick scene there. And then she jumps in front of the billy club that's meant for Daredevil. I feel like that's a hero's death.
I'm going to victim blame. I'm taking accountability right now. First of all, Karen, you already know everything about this man. You don't need to be going through his phone or his bills or his mail to know where he's sending donations. Like, would everything have converged on Sister Maggie and those poor churchgoers if it hadn't been for Karen's nosy ass being up in Matt's business? Let's remember, yes, she tried to save the baby, but also she first went there earlier because she wanted to toss that baby off a building too.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
Matt, your problem earlier, Matt, was not letting go of that baby fast enough, and Natasha having those fast hands. Sidebar. Karen, again, being messy, not just running when she was told to run. Yes, she came up with a good plan, baby switch, whatever. But all in all, Karen's mess put her in the path of that projectile, and all of her messy choices, not just her whole life, but especially in this, that's what got her there.
So basically,
hoes get holes.
Yeah, here's the one thing I will say about this is that although we're both coming up from different angles, we're both saying it's not a fridging.
It's not a fridging. And a fridging is also like, even if it's not a character that's just been introduced, it's like taking a female character and killing her to make her death the motivation for what the almost always a man then has to do for the rest of the story. He has already got motivations on motivations.
Yeah.
Like, we got, is it Antichrist? Is it Messiah? Okay, it's just a baby. Like, now, like, my kind of mom. Yeah, she's my mom. We're on that she's his mom now. And all these churchgoers are getting got. Bullseye's in the mix. There's just shenanigans and shenanigans. Like, it's all happening.
Yeah.
Karen getting got at this point, it's real hat on a hat stuff, if anything. And this is, again, the most Kevin Smith of it all, but it ends up being an epic moment. It could have broken bad in so many ways.
Yeah.
Like, on top of all of this, we're going to have it be like, you're going to kill Karen, and then we're going to introduce Mysterio, who's like not even one of your villains.
Yeah.
But somehow it works.
Well, that's the thing is, it's funny because we talked about this. You mentioned Matt throwing the baby off, Daredevil throwing the baby off the roof.
My favorite moment, honestly.
Well, Smith came up with that because he thought, that'd be edgy and everything like that. The setup at the beginning, like that wasn't he threw the baby off the roof. An issue before that, two random guys go into a maternity ward, go into the nursery and kill all the babies. And that was there because originally it was the ideas that they were, because this was supposed to be stopping the Antichrist, that they were killing all the potential babies that could be the Antichrist. When they changed the story, Smith had to come up with something that was just a random thing that happened, and Mysterio was taking advantage of that. It's like, That particular moment is the one moment that really sticks out when the story changes. Just
Well,
random guys killing babies.
character needs a good backstory. So,
But overall, I enjoy it. I look back at it. The other thing that when it came out as issues, the big deal about it is that they were printed on very different paper from the newsprint at the time. It was like showing like a brand new way to publish a comic. They put actually Palmiotti and Quesada, I think, basically used their own money to make sure that this type of printing was done for these specific books. And that really, caught people's eyes. The whole Smith being involved with it, that really caught people's eyes. And Marvel Knights, in a way, was like one of the forces of late 90s comics that started to push Marvel into like a better form of storytelling because, they were coming out of the comic boom and also they were Chapter 11 bankrupt at this time. That's why they were willing to take gambles. Like, well, we want to get these titles to sell. Let's let these two guys who sell indie comics sell these books, all that sort of stuff. So it is like it's a very important benchmark. And I feel like younger readers who just know about the failed Daredevil the Target series that only had one issue don't realize that Kevin Smith writing Daredevil was an extremely important part of Marvel's kind of rejuvenation.
also, I wonder sometimes if Ben low-key blames him for like building all this excitement on Daredevil and then him thinking, this is a great idea.
Ben has no one to blame but himself.
That's true.
Because here's the thing, the Wizard magazine article that I mentioned, when they interviewed Smith at the time, they said, who do you think should play Daredevil? And he said, Matt Damon. He's like, Matt's a fan of the comic. Him and Ben grew up reading it. He really loves it. I think he'd be perfect. Affleck was the one who kept going to Smith going, I'm the biggest Daredevil fan. I'm a bigger Daredevil fan than anybody, bigger than anybody, and really pushed the idea. And so Smith suggested Affleck to Mark Steven Johnson instead of Matt Damon. So he saved Matt Damon in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I guess his physicality kind of pre-born would have been more Matt like Damon than yeah. Yeah, Affleck always seemed weird for this.
Yeah, well, Affleck's built like a linebacker,
Yeah.
missing
Yeah.
kind of the grace.
Yeah.
There's a
Or
level of
a
grace.
longshoreman. Yeah.
Yeah, brick
Yeah.
shit house, basically.
Yeah. Looks like he should be hauling things off of things or moving.
Or shoving
Yeah.
guys into walls, which is what he did in most movies in the early and mid 90s.
Yeah. All that to say, also one of the things I love about this whole run, as the story is sort of chaotic, the art, it moves from genre to genre. We have sexy matte romance almost stuff. We have horror. The whole Foggy thing is like straight up horror
Oh,
noir.
yeah.
The scratches on the face, the demon hallucination, all of that is like just grotesque and dark and he fully is spending some time in jail in this one. Like
Oh,
the
yeah.
Foggy C plot is not a good time for him.
No, no,
Yeah,
not even
he
a little
definitely
bit.
suffers the consequences of his actions there, that's for sure. Including his mother abandoning him, which is just that's a tough hang.
Oh, yeah.
And that we get back to Karen almost being the way she was in Born Again, where, she's just starting to spiral to the point where her, much like Matt's, ready to toss a baby off a window. And Matt spends a lot of time in this whole run in the costume.
Yeah.
Like he's barely lawyer Matt at all, and if anything, that's how I forgive him for not figuring things out faster. If he like took off the red and put on the tie, I think he might have figured some things out a bit earlier. But he's like there, and it's one thing Mysterio's great at. He's throwing so much at him, he doesn't really have time to like stop and have a serious think. And whenever he does, then it's like Mysterio throws something else at him to keep him on his toes.
And also, you got to remember, he had been drugged throughout most of the first few issues, which was another plot thing that they decided to put in because a lot of people were like, Matt's acting pretty damn aggressive about things. What's going on? So,
I like that Natasha still doesn't cut him any slack even after she knows he's been drugged. Because first of all, absolutely Natasha, somebody with Matt's senses should have figured out he's being affected in some way, perhaps a little earlier without needing to go to Doctor Strange. Also, first you invite me over, I think it's for good times, and then you end up tossing a baby at me and then taking off, and then you try to kill the baby
you
and
see,
me.
What's really interesting is that he initially did invite her over for good times.
Mhm.
The contacting Natasha happens before he
Yes, it
gets the
does.
baby, and
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
like
It's a real bait
on
and
that, yeah, on
switch.
that part, really, you can't blame Matt on that one. That's a
I,
baby fell in his lap after the fact. I'm
I can
saying
blame
on
him
that
for
part.
both. Treating her like a booty call and then an unpaid babysitter
Now, the
comes down
unpaid
to
babysitter
both.
totally, but I feel like him and Natasha have they have an understanding. I think they've been each other's booty calls more than enough times.
It's disrespectful. And then she didn't even get any.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next time, it's like, oh, he's already got another woman staying with him. Yes, Karen just showed up, but still.
I
Matt's
love that. I
messy.
love how you like roll over things like that when you know that there's actually an argument that diffuses what you're saying. Yes,
Yeah.
I know that there's an actual logical
Yeah.
reason for that. Moving on. But anyway.
It's a logical. He could have still, shot her, a phone call. Oh, by the way, thank you for continuing to watch the baby. The booty call, we're gonna have to push that out a couple more weeks in the calendar because
It's
now I have another woman in my bed.
it is hard to
Instead of letting her
remember. It
find
is
out.
hard to remember when you're drugged. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
It was the drugs. It was the drugs. But
Again,
anyways,
it would
anyways,
be just polite. There's a lot of great imagery in this. We get some beautiful moments, some grotesque moments. One of the most gorgeous shots is like him on the steps of the church with his mom, and then he's holding the baby, and his mom's holding him. And I feel like possibly that's where their ability to help edit Kevin Smith worked the best because you have sometimes whole pages and it's like more words than image. But
mhm,
then something like that, we just have the two words help me.
yeah.
And it's just all you're getting everything in the image and it's gorgeous.
No, totally.
Yeah.
The first issue was done completely Marvel method because of the fact that they were on the back foot. When Smith finally came up with this idea, Quesada just said, well, send me a plot for the first three issues. And so he sent a one-page plot for the first issue and had two paragraphs for issues 2 and 3. Quesada ended up using all of that, the one-page plot and the two paragraphs to create all of issue 1. And then he was like, you script it. This is the way, Stan used to do it. Script it. And so he scripted it with very huge blocks of text everywhere. And Joe was like, there's a lot of words there. Kind of break it down. By the time they got to issue 3, he was writing classic full script, which is mentioning the panel as well as the page. And when he handed in issue 3 script, it was 67 pages long, which is 3 times the length of a standard 22-page comic script. Because usually it's a page per page. As they went on, he started to learn less words. But yes,
Mhm.
you mentioned that point. That was when it was beginning to be noticeable that there were less words. Yes, he was finally
Yeah.
getting it, sort of thing.
And then they let him have all words again when we see Spider-Man at the end.
Yes, of
That was
course.
like, I would say, of all of the denouements, I was like, Spider-Man, we're just gonna have a chit chat. It was just like two of the most like rooftopy, dynamic kind of characters, and we're just gonna bro it out.
Yeah, yeah. Well, here's the thing: the original story was supposed to be 6 issues. It ended up becoming 8 issues because of all the length of time and the fact they had to change the story. When issue 7 ends, that's really the end of the book, end of the
It
story.
is, yeah.
Issue 8 was, I personally believe they did a whole extra issue because the book was selling so well, and they didn't want to give up that lead just yet.
And
So
if I was Kevin Smith and you're like, even if all I get to do with Spider-Man is have him sitting on a roof with Matt,
yeah,
I still want to do it.
yeah, and also
Yeah.
they got to do a funeral for Karen in that, which is I feel like weddings and funerals, comic book artists for Marvel and DC secretly love those because of all the Easter eggs they can put in,
Yeah, you get to draw everyone. Yeah.
including Quesada drew the three of them, him, Kevin, and Jimmy, in the back row of the church. In the thing, you also Stan Lee, I believe, is off in the corner in one spot, and then of course you get like the Fantastic Four and different characters like that. That was a beautiful splash page there.
Yeah. The funeral, naming the baby Karen, all that stuff. It was sweet.
Hmm?
But yeah, I'm like, let's have them catch somebody doing something if it's the two of them together. Or at least just have them talk about their stroke game. Because again, one of the things they have in common is having a great roster. And I'm not talking about the Rogues Gallery.
Oh yeah, no, no, I get it, I get it.
Yeah.
By that point, Peter had really calmed down. compared to Matt. Matt was probably way ahead in that department at that point. Peter was more quality, not quantity, whereas Matt's definitely quantity. He's got
Yeah.
quality, but it's
He's
definitely
quantity,
quantity.
but like the ones he returns to your point,
Yeah.
Natasha's probably in the top 2 or 3 for booty calls. His regulars was
Yeah.
like a regular rotation.
Oh yeah, of course. Totally. But overall, yes, we talked about it. This is a book that despite itself ends up being like a classic Daredevil story. Ends up being a great book that, you know, you mentioned it before. Technically, this story shouldn't work. All the things that went against it, the reasons for the motivations for certain characters, the fact that it's Mysterio, none of that should work. But I remember reading it as the books came out. It was so satisfying. You read it later as all collected. You found it satisfying. And, you know, we've discussed it here. I think it's the spontaneity and collaboration that is the main reason why it's probably still to this day Smith's best comic work.
Absolutely. And I think he would agree with that as well. And I think he could still do good comic work, but I think again, he would have to work with people who could tell him what to do and what not to do, corral him,
Yeah.
take all of his Kevinness and funnel it into a good story.
And say, nobody's fucking Frank Miller. That's what they just,
Yeah, it's like baby, like right off jump, it's not going to be Frank Miller level, and that's where he ended up actually creating a legendary title that people still talk about, that they use to reference in even the shows, like when the Daredevil TV show started in 2015, like by acknowledging, yes, you love comics, and obviously you love comics because some of the greats, baby, you're not going to be that, but just be the person you are that really loves stuff and tells interesting stories that can take the best of what you do, which is like mixing humor with like really serious things.
No, totally. And you know, you brought up, yes, Daredevil season 3 pulls from some of Guardian Devil. The Daredevil movie, the one really good thing about the Daredevil movie is the opening shot of Daredevil kind of cradling on top of the cross, on top of the church. That is the cover to Daredevil issue 3 of this run. And all the covers throughout this are probably like, all of them could be a poster. This Quesada, of course, killed it on the interiors, but his covers for this are iconic.
Yeah, the covers are beautiful. Like, yeah, there's so many beautiful moments. You get dark things, grisly things that I talked about, but Natasha again. And it's not just the body, although she's body yada yadaing. Like hair, when her hair in the
opening
wind.
That splash page that opens issue 2, just her face.
Gorgeous.
That's just pure sex. That's
gorgeous. Even the baby. I'm not a baby person. That's an adorable baby.
So basically what we're saying is people definitely check out Guardian Devil if you haven't before. It is a classic Daredevil story. And that brings us to the end of this chapter of House of the Devil. I'm back issue Bloodbath. Petula, where can the good folks find you?
At Inative.com, on social things, at Obesacantavit, Obesacantavit, and here with you.
Of course, you can find everything I do over at geekcardshow.com. Find me on social things at geekcardshow or at Andrew_of_geek_hard on the Instagram. You can follow this very show on Facebook at Back Issue Bloodbath, where we post a new episode every week. Make sure you don't miss an episode. You can always subscribe to us on your podcasting platform of choice. That way, we'll always be here every Wednesday for you. And we'll be talking more Daredevil soon. I believe next week we're going to be talking some Mark Waid Daredevil. A little bit different from the other stuff that we've talked about thus far. This has been Back Issue Bloodbath. I've been Andrew Young.
I'm Petula Neal.
Have yourself a good